Please be seated. Let us pray. Oh God, we gather in this Air Memorial Chapel where generations have come to celebrate, to laugh, to mourn, and perhaps to wonder. We desire your presence here among us as we honor the work that we do together, recognizing the dedication of trustees, faculty, staff, and parents that have been faithful to this school community to help it endure. We celebrate in particular the capacity for creativity, for critical thinking, and for focused effort. We are all grateful for this educational opportunity we have through the Peddie School, one that can transform both our minds and hearts. Allow us to always recognize and affirm the various perspectives that comprise this community. Give us strength to fulfill our motto, when we finish our labors, we begin them anew. This morning, we remember the founding of the Peddie School and ask for courage and wisdom to carry on our work together. Amen.
Thank you, Mia and Becky. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Founders Day. I want to, before I start my remarks, pay special attention and special thanks to our distinguished guest speakers, Mort Goldfein, Arthur Brown, and David Mitchell. And those three men, along with Pat Clements, have spent, 9 months, 10 months, getting ready for today, thinking about it, hatching the idea, all just a lot of work of love and dedication and creativity, and I'm deeply indebted to all four of you. Thank you. We celebrate Founders Day, well, I guess just backing up. We gather 3 times during the year: our opening convocation in September, our assembly at commencement to mark the end of the school year and the beginning of life after Peddie for our seniors, and today, on an occasion to recognize the founding of the Peddie School and to honor those who created, sustained, and continue to propel the school and enrich all of our lives. Founders Day is in February because, as Doc has taught us, Thomas B. Peddie was born February 12th. And even though he did not start the school, he saved the school from oblivion with his historic gift in 1872. A relatively recent tradition has focused Founders Day on especially consequential people of Peddie other than Peddie himself. Sometimes these are people still living with whom we have a personal connection, as with instrumental heads, teachers, and alumni, such as Bob Tucker and Bob Zanker last year. And sometimes these people are legends from the past whose dedication and generosity sustained us, yet whose names are not Peddie, Casperson, or Annenberg. But we still tell the story of a Scottish immigrant and self-made Newark businessman, Thomas Peddie, who saved the infant, faltering New Jersey Classical and Scientific Institute with a gift of $25,000, and how the trustees renamed the school in gratitude. And we still tell the story of Walter Annenberg, class of 1927, son of Moses Annenberg, who fled with his family the anti-Semitic pogroms in East Prussia and immigrated to Chicago in 1885. Young Walter, saddled with a speech impediment and a deformed ear, and living with the controversial reputation of his indomitable father, came to Peddie, was treated well by his teachers, whose names are listed inside Master's house, which was a gift, one of his many gifts, and never forgot his school. He supported it from his graduation until his death, honoring his family name and his school throughout his life, but as you know, most spectacularly in 1993, with a Father's Day gift of $100 million, providing access for innumerable students as a gift to us all. And we still tell the story of Finn Casperson, class of 1959, son of a Norwegian immigrant, a financier, philanthropist, and investor in education. He was the visionary and the determined board chair for Peddie for over 30 years, the man who, with 4 heads of school and scores of trustees, faculty, and families, bulldogged a strong school into becoming an extraordinary school, a determined, honest, and unwavering institution. Those 3 stories, along with others that we have celebrated and others yet to be celebrated, remind us that the Peddie we love today is the dream and the gift of those who came before us. That long line of heroes looks with hope and affection on our years and asks only, make it better, begin anew. This year, Founders Day coincides with the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s coming to Peddie and speaking in this chapel in February 1957. On the one hand, the 28-year-old Dr. King, close in age to our own Kurt Bennett and Janette Brown, was merely another in a series of visiting ministers speaking to students in a Baptist school in central New Jersey, though surely he was one of the first African Americans ever to speak at Peddie. On the other hand, Dr. King was an emerging national figure in the civil rights movement. His anti-segregation message and focus on quote-unquote nonviolent social resistance had been tested in the months before by Rosa Parks and thousands of Alabama citizens in the heroic Montgomery bus boycott. And he was featured on the cover of Time magazine the week before his Peddie visit. Just 38 days before he came to Peddie, terrorists had bombed 4 black churches and two bus boycott leaders and ministers' homes in Montgomery. And a dozen sticks of smoldering dynamite were later removed from the porch of Dr. King's home. Despite this violent response to the success of the bus boycott, Dr. King kept his appointment at Peddie that day and spoke to the assembled school of how the struggle for justice would continue, quote, until the walls of segregation are crumbled by the battering ram of surging justice, unquote. Said King to Peddie, quote, we must never submit to the temptation to indulge in hate campaigns. That's the easy thing to do. Oppressed people must avoid becoming saturated with evil and with hate. This nonviolence is based on a faith in the future, a faith that believes that the universe is on the side of the forces of justice, unquote. Now, for those of you who are young or new to this country, let me offer some historical context for that day. In the 1950s, the United States was still a racially segregated country, black and white, in both North and South. Tradition, custom, and even law in some places sustained this segregation. Before Dr. King and the civil rights movement that many of us recall visually, the movement for civil rights for all began in many other moments and places. For example, in 1939, Marian Anderson, a famed African-American opera star, was denied the opportunity to sing in the Daughters of the American Revolution Concert Hall in Washington, but did so then on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial before 75,000 people after the intervention of Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. Miss Anderson's performance was also broadcast, and so reached many more people than would ever have heard her in the DAR hall. And having been denied a hearing by the Daughters of the American Revolution, she began her performance as we began our chapel with My Country 'Tis of Thee. Then in 1854, the United States Supreme Court delivered the Brown versus Board of Education decision, overturning the infamous 58-year-old doctrine of separate but equal, and paving the way for desegregating public institutions like schools, the armed forces, and public transportation. Racial terrorism continued, as here in the 1955 lynching of Emmett Till, whose nationally publicized funeral image was a catalyst for awakening anger. In 1956, the year-long Montgomery bus boycott, initiated by Rosa Parks' refusal to sit in the back of the bus and sustained by hundreds of volunteers, won a victory for desegregating public transportation. But pushback continued, as in the KKK cross-burning on the front yard of an Alabama minister. 1957 also marked Arkansas Governor Orville Fabus's resistance against the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. The governor's use of the Arkansas National Guard to enforce his illegal resistance, and President Eisenhower's response to federalize the National Guard, return them to their barracks, and send troops from the 101st Airborne Division to accompany African American students to the schools they were entitled to attend. It was the most dramatic dispute between the state and the federal government since the Civil War. Meanwhile, at Peddie, the color line had been broken in 1948 by Horace Brown, class of 1951, senior class secretary, soccer captain. Horace Brown was first a few years earlier, but the school looked like this, all male and white, these seniors in the class of 1957. It was into this Peddie that Dr. King came. In this chapel that February day was Junior Mort Goldfein, class of 1959, a hotshot writer for the Peddie News, from Theodore Roosevelt Junior High in West Orange, and now a distinguished New Jersey attorney and activist. Enrolling later as a freshman from Trenton's Junior High School number 3 was Arthur E. Brown, class of 1963, an honored physician, a specialist in infectious diseases at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. Also in the chapel that day, enrolled only a couple weeks earlier, was a new student, a sixth grader from down the road in Bordentown, perhaps the only African-American student in school that year, the Honorable David B. Mitchell, class of 1963. He is a longtime, now retired, circuit court judge of Baltimore City, Maryland, and classmate of Dr. Brown's. So we welcome you today. You, some of the people on whose shoulders we stand, who were once new students to Peddie, and who, like you and others who will follow you, sat in these pews, went to classes, played sports, acted on stage, and built the Peddie of their day. And one day, 60 years ago, your school came into this chapel to hear one of the most prominent voices of the 20th century and an enduring voice in human history. Then they went back to their daily routine, perhaps thinking about how they might begin anew. Now we will hear from these three guests and friends, Peddie graduates who have made lives of professional success and the highest quality of citizenship. Alaviva.
Good morning. Mr. Quinn has already given many of the particulars of our professional lives. We'll get into greater detail later. But let me take a moment to just introduce my friend, Mort Goldfein, class of 1959. Mort to some, but Skip to many others, was an active student while at Peddie. He was engaged with the Peddie News, serving as sports editor and then editor-in-chief of the newspaper in his last year. After graduation from Peddie, he went on to Tufts University, graduated from Tufts, and then to the University of Pennsylvania School of Law. His nearly 50-year career at law includes service as a Deputy Attorney General of the state of New Jersey. His specialization was in the area of environmental law for the state and for the citizens of the state of New Jersey. After his period with the Attorney General's office, he returned to private practice, where he became engaged in real estate development and nonprofit representation. He's traveled extensively throughout the world in his legal career, including time in China, engaged with economic development issues in 5 cities in that broad and vast nation. He has also spent time with economic rights development and human rights development in Russia. Skip was an active member of the Peddie Board of Trustees for a number of years. I had the privilege of joining him on the board before he left the board. His service on the board, including the period of time when The Gift arrived and transformed Peddie. Always the writer, he still has that great American novel in his pencil. In the meantime, waiting for that lead to hit the paper, he is writing short stories, novels, and he has published a couple of books on poetry. In a few moments, you will hear more from Skip.
Wow, just think about it. The oldest guy in the room is called Skippy. It's my great pleasure to introduce my cub reporter, Arthur Brown, over here, who showed good work in spelling at the Peddie News. We didn't ever have to edit too much of Arthur's work. But he's come here, continuing a career as the doctor's doctor. In addition to his amazing publication, I got some numbers here, I got to refer to them. His record of publications. Arthur has published 93 scholarly papers, 19 books and monographs, 29 reviews, and 105 medical abstracts. That sounds like a full-time occurrence. But in the meantime, he's a professor at the Cornell Medical College in New York. But when I refer to him as the doctor's doctor, that says it all, because at one of the leading hospitals of the world, Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, he runs the service that provides medical care to the doctors and the nurses and the techs and all the people that make that place what it is today. Through his research, he has assisted humanity. Through his kindness and his generosity, he has participated in bringing our school to where it is today. And through his relationship with Judge Mitchell, he's taught us all quite something about what the relationships built at Peddie can lead to. That's my friend Art Brown.
Thank you, Skip. It is a special honor for me to introduce my dear friend and Peddie classmate, the Honorable David B. Mitchell, class of 1963. Judge Mitchell came to Peddie as a day student in the 6th grade from Bordentown, New Jersey. Judge Mitchell has served Peddie with distinction as a trustee from 1995, excuse me, David, through 2011, and continues as an advisory trustee from 2011. He remains active on the board's legal committee. He attended and graduated from Fisk University in 1967, where he met his bride-to-be, sitting in the front row here, Diane Laverne Thomas. They married on January 29th, 1967. Judge Mitchell graduated from Columbia University School of Law with a JD, Juris Doctor, in 1970 and was admitted that same year to the Maryland State Bar. He's a founding partner of the firm Mitchell and Lee. Starting in 1984, Judge Mitchell rose through the judicial ranks to become Associate Judge of the Baltimore City Circuit Court 8th Judicial Circuit. He distinguished himself on the bench, particularly in the area of juvenile and family law. Judge Mitchell was featured in Time magazine in 1992 for his work for reforming the juvenile justice system in the state of Maryland. He served as judge in charge of both the juvenile docket and the criminal docket, and was chair of many judicial committees and conferences concerning juvenile justice. He was a lecturer and faculty member of the National College of Juvenile and Family Law, and stepped down from the bench to become director and chief executive officer of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. David is the recipient of many awards. I will mention 2. The Maryland Leadership in Law Award and the Lawrence S. Greenbaum Prize for Appellate Advocacy from Columbia University School of Law. Most importantly, David and Diane have been happily married and just celebrated 50 years of marriage together.
Me. I gotta get this one out of here. What am I doing? Take the photo, this one?
Yes,
Wow. Wow, that's a surprise. Class dismissed, everybody early. So, we're each asked to give you a bit of flavor of our experience here and where it's led us. You've heard some details of the careers and the happiness that we've enjoyed. We're lucky. We're very lucky. We're lucky like you. So here's how I got here. My dad, with a year and a half of high school, having been born in 1909 in the Bronx in New York, found an opportunity, if you could call it that, within the family by moving to Newark, where cousins operated a shop selling surplus goods, military uniforms and the like, from World War I. And he pushed a cart up and down Market Street to bring some revenue into his family. He moved on and up, part of the great American story. And he had a business. He came to a business as a salesman of these things, these labels, these woven labels. And he worked very hard at that. When the Second War started, the Second World War started, the draft board where we lived said they would not draft fathers who held defense jobs. My father continued his rising career in the woven label business and worked a full shift in a spark plug factory through the duration of the Second World War, every night. So he would come home, change into his overalls, pick up his dinner box, and go off to the factory. He wasn't alone. That's what people did. They weren't as lucky as us. But they did what had to be done, and they moved along. After the war, he established his own business in that field, and he did pretty well. He increased the size of his wares. So it wasn't just these guys, it became those labels you see on the back of rugs. And there was a rug company here in Hightstown. In fact, that was the name of it, the Hightstown Rug Company. And that became one of his clients. And he learned that the son of the owner of the Hightstown Rug Company went to the Peddie School. And he resolved that his son was going to the Peddie School. Here we are. I'm awfully glad about that. And every time I turn over the carpet and I see one of those labels, that's what got me here. But while I was here, let's talk. I just want to narrow this to 1957. I was here for 3 great years, I must tell you. Not every moment was terrific, but there were some that really stand out. The presence of Dr. King here was one of those. But my memories of it are aided by what I've read in the bound volume of the Peddie News from that year and some of the other materials that have been assembled in anticipation of today. But there were a few other interesting days. Earlier that year, in October, as you know, we always have the World Series in October, and I was a rabid Yankee fan in those days. And there were only 2 places on campus where one could watch things like baseball on television. There was a smoking lounge, can you believe it? A smoking lounge in the basement of then Wilson Hall, where if you had the right permissions from your parents, you could go smoke and watch a TV. It wasn't enough to make me smoke. The other place was over here. It's now called Roberson Dorm, I think, and that was the infirmary. Well, there was a TV in the sunroom of the infirmary. If you were sick and you were lodged in the Roberson Infirmary, you could watch television. I feigned illness. I did. I feigned illness and found my way to the infirmary. They checked me in. They gave me a bed. I slept through Don Larson's perfect game. There was justice in that because I wasn't sick until I got there. I went there to watch the game. I got sick, didn't watch the game, and learned ever since, stay away from the television, if you can. We were a pretty diverse crowd, our class. There were only 80 of us in those days. We were from, I think, 8 countries. Well, we had individuals from, I think, 8 countries. Several of those people remain among my close friends. Now we have the social media, the technology to stay connected, and I like that a lot. There was a night, and it must have been pretty close to the time of Dr. King's appearance here, when my English teacher took me and 2 others in his Volkswagen Bug up to the Rutgers campus on a cold, wet night. And we stood outside the Rutgers Chapel and listened through the window as Robert Frost read his poetry. Vivid memory probably introduced me to poetry. I wish I could write good poetry That was great poetry. And it was a wonderful evening. And something else that the bound volume of the Peddie News will tell you about that year, we beat Blair. I think the winning touchdown was scored by my classmate, Deckel McLean. Deckel is a member of the Peddie Sports Hall of Fame. He was our halfback. He was a great hurdler and a sprinter. He was the son of an African-American dentist in Jersey City, maybe the only African-American dentist in Jersey City at the time. He was president of our class. He went on to Harvard. He has had a career in academics, teaching journalism. He practiced journalism for a number of years. We never talked about Dr. King, Deckel and I. I don't recall talking about Dr. King with anybody. We came into the chapel that day because it's what we did. 4 days a week we came into the chapel. There were, 1 day a week was set aside from pastors of other churches. Our school chaplain preached 1 day a week. Sundays was the best. We all had to go to our own church. That was a little tricky for us Jewish guys. But the little synagogue in town here spoke to the school, and they held a service for us on Sunday mornings. The Jews and the Catholics would go to the Hightstown Diner for breakfast, walk down, make the turn on 33. The little synagogue was across the street from the Catholic church in those days. The Catholics would go into the church, the Jews would cross the street, and brotherhood. Brotherhood. That's what it felt like. And another function of the chaplain in those days, we had religion classes. I didn't learn anything about my faith in those classes, but I learned a lot about everybody else's faith. Those were really informative and helped me understand diversity in that realm. So maybe we were too young to appreciate what our cloistered world protected us from, which Dr. King came here and alerted us to, because we were living in a bubble there. We were. But it did register. I don't have to go back to the bound volume of the Peddie News to read of the impact of that, because as I look here today, I look out into your faces today, that's what he had in mind. He wanted places, institutions, important institutions like Peddie, to become a part of the change. I'm very proud that our school has done that. I'm very proud that you're here to enjoy that, and I challenge you to continue that. Thank you.
I've never been up here. It's quite a sight. Like many of you, I came to Peddie as a boarder. I was from Trenton, New Jersey, starting 8th grade, and arrived in the fall of 1958, about 18 months after the Reverend Martin Dr. Luther King had spoken at Peddie. My recollections include wearing a dink as a new boy, something I don't think goes on anymore. Peddie was an all-boys school. Maybe that's the bubble that Mort was referring to. It was strange without girls. It's not strange anymore. It was a place where pink bellies were given, beach parties were thrown, and green trolleys took place. The three of us can have a seminar later if you want to know what that means. And I was an awkward teenager, a geek, or a nerd in today's parlance. But I liked Peddie, and I did well, except in English. E. Graham Ward was very tough. I was active, as you heard, on the Peddie News. I swam the 50 and 100-yard freestyle events and in the relay events. And I liked science and math. Still, I was socially awkward and a little timid to join in. My roommate, Mike Duffy, on the other hand, was very gregarious. To me, he seemed a natural who effortlessly bridged the gap between the jocks and the academic nerds. He encouraged me to stop worrying about acceptance, to be myself, to join in. He helped make it safe. With his support, I eventually took the plunge. And I never looked back, and I am very grateful. But the message that Peddie provided me with the safe and comfortable environment in which I could take that risk. And when I took it, I was included. But it was not that way for everyone. As you heard from Mr. Quinn, it was not until 1948 that Peddie admitted its first African-American student. And in the 60s, aside from a single student from the U.S. Virgin Islands, David Mitchell was the only black student in our class of 1963. And there were no people of color on the faculty either. David can attest to the fact that there were issues. It is extraordinarily important that we as a society maintain and cultivate safe and comfortable community environments where young people can take chances, explore, and find their best selves. At first, it may seem strange to you that I tell my story on the occasion of celebrating the 60th anniversary of Dr. King's chapel speech at Peddie in 1957. This story has no racial, gender, or religious punchline. It is not a story for the ages, but it is a story about community. It is a story of how a community can support young people. Peddie's culture has evolved dramatically over the decades since I graduated. The student body is much more diverse than the white male upper middle class that made it up when I experienced Peddie in the 50s and 60s. Look around this chapel right now for proof. Your Mike Duffy is sitting here, and thankfully he or she may be very different from you. That move towards diversity was not an accident. It was well thought out and very carefully planned, and it was purposeful. And it took lots of work to achieve. My message to you today is that to sustain this precious Peddie culture, of which we are all beneficiaries, the work needs to continue. Don't take this for granted. Don't become complacent. This was hard-earned and could easily slip away if not carefully nurtured. If Peddie is a garden, then it must be continuously renewed and cultivated by all of us, and this must be done for all the generations to come. And if Peddie is a microcosm of the world we wish to inhabit, we must do the same for civilization. Create a community where inclusiveness is fostered and celebrated by example. Thank you.
The first step is a killer. The last is least. Good morning. My wife, Diane, as you heard, is in the audience. And so, folks, you must understand, Diane is an educator. And when we say good morning, there must be a more brisk response. Good morning. There we go. Good morning. This non-traditional celebration of Founders Day at Peddie is a confluence of the critical stakeholders in the life of this magnificent school. First, you, the students. I digress for just a moment. You look like the past. When we came to chapel every day, it was coat and ties. And it's a throwback. It's back to the future. Give yourselves a hand, you look marvelous. In addition to you being here, this Founders Day is also dedicated to an extraordinary, remarkable, and dedicated core of great and inspired faculty and committed staff. This day is also dedicated to our alumni, both present and those who are able to visit us through the continuing miracle of the internet. And finally, but not least, today is a celebration and community of our Board of Trustees, without whose dedication, selfless commitment, and sacrifice, as well as generosity, has made it possible for each of us to enjoy the benefits and fruits of this institution. Throughout these discussions this morning, we have neglected to mention something, and that is Pat Clements. Pat has been by my side, I've been by his side, as we crafted the thoughts of this effort of commemorating not just Dr. King, but commemorating each of you, and reminding you that despite what you heard from us and about us, the three of us sat in these pews. The three of us individually were students sitting in here looking up at someone at this lectern. And we wanted this to be dedicated to you and to inspire you to move forward. We mark the commemoration of this day throughout the weekend as the Peddie family acknowledges a memorable occasion 60 years ago, and that was at the coming Monday. It was a seminal event when a rising voice of the revolution in America spoke to a northern audience, an audience that was unsure, many unknowing, and probably a few who were very skeptical individuals regarding the struggle of the Negro in America. It was just becoming a general topic of discussion. You must put yourself at the time. There were only 3 national media outlets, ABC, CBS, and NBC. They broadcast 15 minutes each at night at 6 p.m. That was it. There were only a few magazines, Time, Newsweek, but they published weekly. Then there were the newspapers, the New York Times, etc. The stories they told of what happened in the South, in particular, riveted the nation. We mark that day of Dr. King's appearance here throughout this weekend as we acknowledge that moment 60 years ago and recognize how it transformed Peddie. This recalls the story to me of our alumnus, Ambassador Walter Annenberg, and his journey through Peddie. In the same way that Dr. Morong and the staff of the school invited Dr. King to appear here. This was definitely against the grain. But we also recognize, as Mr. Quinn has spoken to you before, that this activity was a challenge to the legal bounds of injustice and oppression in America. Terror afflicted the landscape of the South, and it was broken only by the independence of a judiciary that stood its ground for equality and fair play, despite the reluctance of a president and a Congress. Then, as today, 500 students fill this edifice. There is a diverse crowd here today. It wasn't the same 60 years ago. Then there were 2 African American students sitting in the audience. 2 in 500. I suddenly became conscious of students that I had not known before. But life at Peddie has changed. Life at Peddie has changed markedly. I was blessed to serve on the Board of Trustees for a number of years. And in that capacity, we had our meetings, like the board is meeting this weekend. I came to campus one of those Saturday mornings for a board meeting. I drove up. I was early, so I sat outside in my car thinking I'd have an opportunity to look at a few notes. I got engrossed in those notes, and then I lost track of time. The next thing I knew, when I looked up, students came spilling out of the dormitory in droves. You know how you do. Saturday morning, 2 minutes before class, you got to get there. And it caught my gaze, and I suddenly realized that this is not the Peddie I knew. There were all sorts of colors, all genders, all nationalities, represented as one body, beating feet to get to class. Before I knew it, and before I realized it, tears rolled down my eyes. Peddie had changed. And it had changed in my lifetime. I can only speak for myself, an awkward and very overwhelmed kid of 11 years of age, 11, in my second week as a student on campus when Dr. King stood at this podium and spoke to this assemblage. I know, even though I was 11, of my pride of him as a speaker and as a leader. My family was aware of him. We were proud of him, but we were also increasingly anxious about him and for him and his family. My parents, whom the school was so kind to invite to hear Dr. King's speech, and I were well aware of what was happening in the South and in other parts of the country. We knew of Emmett Till. We knew of the massive resistance to societal change occurring in the South. We knew of the daunting and mounting atrocities that seemed to occur and become a daily carnage in America. We knew and experienced the 4 whites only, 4 colored only signs that dotted the landscape of public accommodations in the South. We traveled on occasion in the South and saw those signs, and we had to heed the warnings. We knew of the pervasive atmosphere of dread and fear that dominated life for Negroes, and the permeating knowledge was present in us that we were either hated or loathed because of our raiment, our skin. I was aware of the palpable sense that my potential contributions to America were not anticipated. But I sat in these seats with you those years ago, and throughout my journey of 6.5 years at Peddie, and I was also aware of the kindness, understanding, and generosity that was extended to me. The hand of fellowship went in my direction. We honor not just our founders of 1864. We honor not just other luminaries at Peddie. We honor Mrs. Irwin and Mrs. Laird, parents of classmates of mine who were very kind to me. We honor Mrs. Marable the school nurse. We honor Harold Stoddard, Reverend Stoddard, the chaplain of the school. We honor my friend, Finn Casperson. We honor Thomas DeGray. And we honor Ann Seltzer. She is one of the founders of this school. Do you know that she is the first and the only woman to serve as head of school, of Peddie School? She's in your presence. You should know this. You should know her. We honor many, many more who are unspoken here because they helped create this school. They helped change this school. You've heard of the Annenbergs, you've heard of the Caspersons, but you're changing this school too. You are now founders of Peddie. I survived at Peddie because of the bounds of friendship that I made here. One of them is on this dais. I was estranged from Peddie for many years. Some of you know the story. I vowed never to set foot on this campus, ever, once I left it. The class of 1963 had a motto that we carry for Peddie. What is it, Arthur? We lived it, we hated it. We loved it. Those friends are with me today, but Arthur Brown is a friend of mine. We met and made friends here at Peddie. My mother was a nurse and was engaged with his family in helping members of his family. We became friends at Peddie, and he knew of my estrangement from Peddie. And Arthur said, no, that can't last. That can't remain. And I won't go into the details, but Arthur brought me back to this school. I'm ever so grateful for him. Several years ago, when we had a reunion for our 50th class reunion, my beloved partner in love and in life, as you've heard now for 50 years, Diane, looked at us as we gathered for our reunion, and she said, I can see you as boys. And I didn't understand it at the time, but she could see us as we were then, as you are now, as you sit in these chapel's pews. Boys and girls. Picture yourselves years from now returning, and people will be able to say they saw you when you were young. They can see you when you were young, when you were children. Peddie is different today. We struggled on my day trying to get through all the educational experiences that were Peddie. We struggled with teen male angst. We struggled trying to deal with girls, acne, food on campus, college, whether we were going to get into college, which college, and on and on. But we moved on, and you will move on as well. I close by reminding you of Dr. King, where we began today. And Dr. King said those years ago in this chapel that the enemy is not individuals and their specific evil deeds. You must challenge injustice wherever and whenever it is presented. You must do so with love for your fellow human beings, and you must do so nonviolently. Remember, the cry is never again. Never again for oppression or injustice or the culture and value that you received here, that each and every one of you is valuable, and each and every one of you has a contribution to make, and that this diverse society that you have here, this diverse community that you enjoy here, is not always repeated when you step into the larger community. You must fight to have it here. You must fight to have it there. Life is a garden, but there are weeds that will grow in it. There will be those who will try to pull you in directions and fill you with hate. And you must fight against that. You must still love human beings and fight oppression. You must still value your diverse culture. Sitting next to you, sitting behind you, in your dorm room or at your table is that person who will be your friend for life. Value that person. Value your experience here. Alla Viva.
Dear God in heaven, you've set a restlessness in our hearts and made us seekers after that which we can never fully find. Keep us a task too hard for us that we may be driven to thee for strength. Deliver us from fretfulness and self-pity. Make us sure of the goal we cannot see and of the hidden good of the world. Save us from ourselves and show us a vision of a world made new. And may thy spirit of peace enlighten our minds until all life shall glow with new meaning and purpose. Amen.